Long ago, in a peaceful kingdom surrounded by deep forests and towering mountains, people began whispering about something strange. Travelers claimed they had seen a young man running through the forest faster than any human should. Some said he moved like an animal. Others swore they had seen him standing beside a pack of wolves, as if he were one of them. But the strangest part of the story was not that the boy lived among wolves. Many years before the villagers began seeing the mysterious boy, the kingdom had been filled with joy. The king and queen had just welcomed a baby son. The entire kingdom celebrated the birth of the young prince. Bells rang through the city. Candles were lit in every home, and the people believed the prince would grow up to become a great ruler one day. But that happiness did not last long. One terrible night, enemies attacked the kingdom. The palace guards fought bravely, but chaos spread everywhere. Fires burned in the streets. Soldiers rushed through the palace halls. Servants tried to protect the royal family as the attack grew more violent. In the middle of the panic, something unimaginable happened. The baby prince disappeared. No one knew how. Some believed he had been taken by the attackers. Others feared something even worse had happened. The king ordered the entire forest searched. Hundreds of soldiers looked for days, then weeks, but they found nothing. No footprints, no signs, no trace of the young prince. And slowly, the kingdom began to believe the terrible truth. The prince was gone, forever. But deep inside the dark forest, the story of the lost prince was only just beginning. And somewhere in the darkness, a baby was crying. The small prince had somehow been carried deep into the forest during the chaos. Wrapped in royal cloth, he lay alone among the roots of a giant tree. Too young to understand what had happened, from between the trees, a pack of wolves slowly appeared. Their glowing eyes watched the helpless child. One by one, they stepped closer. For a moment, the forest seemed to hold its breath. The wolves did something no one in the kingdom could ever imagine. They began raising the lost prince as one of their own. Seasons passed in the great forest. Winter came and went. Spring returned again and again, and slowly, the helpless baby began to grow. Under the watchful eyes of the wolf pack, the child learned to survive in a world very different from the palace he had been born into. The wolves became his family. They protected him from danger. They kept him warm during the cold nights. And as the boy grew stronger, he began to follow them everywhere. The forest became his home. He learned how to move silently between the trees. He learned how to listen to the sounds of the wind and animals. He watched the wolves hunt and slowly began to understand their ways. To the wolves, he was no longer a strange creature. He was one of the pack. Years passed, and the small baby grew into a strong young man. His movements were quick and silent. His eyes were sharp and watchful, and though he was human, his spirit had been shaped by the wild forest. But sometimes, hunters traveling through the woods caught a glimpse of something strange. A tall young man moving through the trees, surrounded by wolves. They returned to the village with unbelievable stories. Stories of a wild boy who ran with wolves. Soon the rumors spread throughout the kingdom. People began whispering about the mysterious figure in the forest. They called him only one name, the Wolf Boy. But none of them knew the truth. The wild boy they feared was the prince they had lost many years ago. One quiet afternoon, a group of villagers traveled along a narrow road near the edge of the forest. They had spent the day trading goods in a nearby town and were now returning home. The road was peaceful. Birds sang in the trees, and the forest seemed calm. But suddenly, the calm was broken. From behind the trees, a group of bandits jumped onto the road. The villagers froze in fear. The bandits surrounded them quickly. "Hand over everything you have," one of them shouted. The frightened villagers had no weapons. no way to fight back. And deep inside the forest, someone had heard the noise. The wolf pack stopped moving. Their ears lifted. They could hear the shouting. The young man who had grown up among them listened carefully. Then, without hesitation, he ran toward the sound. The wolves followed. Back on the road, the bandits began stealing the villagers' belongings. One of them raised his sword toward an old man who tried to resist. But before the sword could fall, a loud growl echoed through the forest. The bandits turned in shock. From the trees, a pack of wolves burst onto the road, and running with them was the mysterious wild young man. The wolves surrounded the bandits instantly, growling, snarling. The attackers panicked. Within seconds, the bandits fled back into the forest. Silence returned to the road. The villagers stood frozen, staring at the strange young man. He stood among the wolves calmly, watching them. He did not speak. He did not threaten them. Instead, he simply turned and began walking back toward the forest. The villagers watched in disbelief. The wild boy had just saved them. The villagers returned to the city before sunset, still shaken by what they had seen. Their story spread quickly through the marketplace. At first, people laughed. "A boy raised by wolves," they said. "That's impossible." But the villagers insisted. They described the wolves. They described the strange young man who moved like an animal. And most importantly, they described the necklace. A necklace with the royal crest of the kingdom. That part made people stop laughing, because there was only one person who had ever worn such a necklace, the prince who had disappeared many years ago. Soon the story reached the palace. The royal advisors listened carefully as the villagers repeated what they had seen. Then the news reached the king himself. For a long moment, the king said nothing. He had spent years believing his son was gone forever. But the thought that his child might still be alive was impossible to ignore. Finally, he gave an order. "Send the royal guards to the forest. If there is any truth to this story, we must find the boy." The next morning, a group of soldiers rode toward the forest. The soldiers heard something moving through the trees. A shadow moved quickly between the branches, and when they looked up, they saw him, standing among a pack of wolves, the mysterious wolf boy. The soldiers stared in shock, because around his neck hung the same royal necklace the lost prince had worn on the night he disappeared. And in that moment, one terrifying possibility became clear. The wild boy raised by wolves might truly be the lost prince of the kingdom. He carried the same features the king had when he was young. The lost prince had survived, but convincing him to return to the palace would not be easy. Because the wolves did not leave his side, they circled protectively around him. To them, he was not a prince. He was family. The soldiers returned to the palace and told the king everything they had seen. And the very next day, the king himself rode into the forest. When the wolves saw him approach, they growled softly, but the prince stood still. "My son," the prince did not understand the words. He had never lived among humans. But something about the moment felt important. Slowly, the wolves stepped closer to him, as if waiting to see what he would do. The palace, where he had been born, or the forest, where he had been raised. But behind the prince stood the wolves who had protected him since he was a baby. Then he did something unexpected. He stepped forward and stood beside the king, but he turned back to the wolves and gently touched the head of the alpha wolf. A silent promise. He would never forget them, because the boy who had once been raised by wolves had learned something many kings never understand. True strength does not come from power. It comes from loyalty and from remembering where you came from.